Dear colleagues, we have several questions today, one of which is the development of our relations with friends on the African continent. The Russia-Africa Summit will soon be held in Russia. Let's discuss an issue related to such an important area as the use of information technology in ensuring the security of the country. But first I would like to ask if anyone has any current questions. Please, Sergei Evgenyevich. According to incoming information from well-known sources, official Warsaw comes to the realization that no Western assistance to Kyiv is able to support Ukraine for the purposes that were included in this assistance. Moreover, comes the realization that the issue of the defeat of Ukraine is a matter of time, and in this regard, the Polish leadership is intensifying its mood to control the western territory of Ukraine, the western regions, by deploying its troops there. Such a step is planned to be formalized as the fulfillment of allied obligations within the framework of the Polish-Lithuanian-Ukrainian initiative in the field of security, the so-called Lublin Triangle. We see that this is planned in connection with the increase in the strength of the combined arms, Polish, Ukrainian, and Lithuanian army, which operates under the auspices of the Lublin Triangle. It seems to us that these rather dangerous plans of the Polish leadership will be closely monitored. Yes, that's what Sergei Evgenyevich just said. We should probably dwell on it in more detail. This information has already appeared in the European, in particular, in the French press. I think in this connection, it would be appropriate to recall some of the lessons of the history of the 20th century. Today, it is clear that the Western curators of the Kyiv regime clearly disappointed with the results of the so-called counter-offensive, which the current Ukrainian authorities have loudly announced in previous months. Anyway, there are no results yet. Neither the colossal resources that were sent to the Kiev regime help, nor the supply of Western weapons, tanks, artillery, armored vehicles, missiles, nor the dispatch of thousands of foreign mercenaries and advisors, who were most actively used in attempts to break through the front of our army. At the same time, the command of the special military operation is acting professionally. Our soldiers and officers of the unit and formation are doing their duty to the motherland, courageously, steadfastly, heroically. At the same time, the whole world sees that the vaunted Western supposedly invulnerable equipment is on fire, and in terms of its tactical and technical data, it is often even inferior to some types of weapons still of Soviet production. Yes, of course, Western weapons can be additionally supplied and thrown into battle. This, of course, causes us some damage and prolongs the conflict. But, firstly, NATO arsenals and stockpiles of old Soviet weapons in some states are already largely devastated. And secondly, the existing production facilities in the West do not allow you to quickly replenish the consumption of reserves of equipment and ammunition. More and more resources and time are needed. Most importantly, as a result of suicidal attacks, the formations of the Ukrainian army suffered huge losses. These are tens of thousands of people. And despite the constant raids and the ongoing waves of total mobilization in the cities and villages of Ukraine, it is increasingly difficult for the current regime to drive new replenishment to the front. The mobilization resource of the country is depleted. People in Ukraine increasingly have a legitimate question: for what and for the sake of whose selfish interests do their relatives and friends perish? Gradually and slowly, but sobering comes. We see that public opinion in Europe is changing, and Europeans and representatives of European elites see that the so-called support for Ukraine is, in fact, a dead end, an endless waste of money and effort, but in fact, serving far from European interests, the interests of the overseas global hegemon, which benefits from the weakening of Europe, beneficial to him and the endless dragging out of the Ukrainian conflict. Judging by what is happening in real life, today's US ruling elites do just that. In any case, they adhere to this logic. Is such a policy in the true, fundamental interest of the American people? This is a big question. The question is of course rhetorical. Let them decide for themselves. But now the fire of war is being intensively kindled, including using for this the ambitions of the leaders of some Eastern European states that have long turned hatred of Russia and Russophobia into their main export product and into an instrument of their domestic policy. Now they want to warm their hands on the Ukrainian tragedy. In this regard, I cannot but comment on what has just been said. A message appeared in the press about plans to create some so-called Polish-Lithuanian-Ukrainian connection. That is, we are not talking about some kind of gathering of mercenaries. There are enough of them there, and they are destroyed. Namely, about a regularly put together equipped military unit that is planned to be used for operations on the territory of Ukraine, including for allegedly ensuring the security of modern Western Ukraine. But in fact, if you call a spade, for the subsequent occupation of these territories, after all, the prospect is clear. If Polish units enter, for example, Lviv or other territories of Ukraine, then they will remain there, and they will remain forever. And by the way, this is nothing new. Let me remind you that after the defeat of Germany and its allies, as a result of the First World War, the Polish units occupied Lviv and the surrounding lands that then belonged to Austria-Hungary. Poland, incited by the West, took advantage of the tragedy of the civil war in Russia, annexed some historical Russian provinces. Our country, which was then in a difficult situation, was forced to conclude the Riga Treaty in 1921 and, in fact, recognized the rejection of its territories, and even earlier, in 1920, Poland captured part of Lithuania, the territory around modern Vilnius. It seems that together with the Lithuanians they fought against the so-called Russian imperialism, and as soon as the opportunity turned up, they immediately took away a piece of land from their neighbors. Poland also participated, as is known, in the division of Czechoslovakia as a result of the Munich Agreement with Hitler in 1938, completely occupied Silesia in the 20s and 30s of the last century in the so-called eastern outskirts of Poland, and this is the territory of Western Ukraine, Western Belarus and part of Lithuania. Severe Polonization and assimilation of local residents was carried out. There was a suppression of national cultures of orthodoxy. I also want to remind you of how such an aggressive policy ended for Poland as a result, and it ended with the national tragedy of 1939, when Poland was thrown by the Western Allies to be devoured by the German military machine, and actually lost its independence and statehood, which was restored to a large extent thanks to the Soviet Union. And it was thanks to the Soviet Union, thanks to the position of Stalin, that Poland received significant lands in the West, the lands of Germany. It's exactly like that. The Western territories of present-day Poland are Stalin's gift to the Poles. Have our friends in Warsaw forgotten about this? We will remind. Today we see that the regime in Kyiv is ready to do anything to save its venal skin and prolong its existence. They do not care about the people of Ukraine, its sovereignty and national interests. They will trade everything and people and land. Also, by the way, like their ideological predecessors, the Petlerists, who in 1920 concluded with Poland the so-called secret conventions, according to which, in exchange for military support, they gave Poland the lands of Galicia and Western Volhynia. Even today such traitors are ready to open the gates for foreign masters and once again sell Ukraine. As for the Polish leaders, they probably expect to form some kind of coalition under the NATO umbrella and directly intervene in the conflict in Ukraine in order to then tear off a fatter piece for themselves and regain, as they consider their historical territories, today's Western Ukraine. It is well known that they also dream of the Belarusian lands. As for the policy of the Ukrainian regime, this is his business. They want, as it is with traitors, to hand over something, sell it, pay off the owners with something. I will repeat it. In the end, it is their business. We will not interfere in this. But as for Belarus, this is part of the Union state, and unleashing aggression against Belarus will mean aggression against the Russian Federation. We will respond to this with all the means at our disposal. The Polish authorities while hatching their revanchist plans, do not tell the truth to their people either. But the truth is that the West is clearly not enough Ukrainian cannon fodder, not enough. So the entrance plans to launch a new consumable material for the Poles themselves, Lithuanians, and further down the list, all of whom are not sorry. I will say one thing: this is a very dangerous game, and the author of such plans should think about the consequences. Sergei Evgenievich, I hope that your service, as well as our other special services, will closely monitor the development of events